decade, not just for CNBC TV18 as a channel, but for India as a whole. Over the last 10 years, we've chronicled the highs and the lows of the Indian economy, the boom and the bust, the agony and ecstasy of reforming India. So as we celebrate 10 years, we thought it was only fitting to turn the clock back on the decade that transformed India. Ago, India was on the cusp of a new millennium. The world's most populous democracy was emerging from the twin shocks of the East Asian crisis and the post-Pokhran sanctions. India had also just faced a war, a super cyclone, several months of political uncertainty, a near tripling of crude prices and a fragility of the world economic recovery. But the decade that followed saw India embark on a growth trajectory, along with several critical policy changes. On February 29, 2000, Yashwant Sinha, the Finance Minister of the National Democratic Alliance government headed by Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, presented the first budget of the new millennium. It was also the first budget of the second half-century of the Indian Republic. Looking back, Union Minister Kamal Nath says the last decade saw successive governments focus on reforms.
So the 10 years saw a great metamorphosis in the economy. What was initiated by Dr. Manmohan Singh as Finance Minister in 1991, a reform process, not a reform process of any other kind in the world, but a reform process which was very India-specific.
India grew about 8.8% in the 5-year period between 2003-4 to 2007-2008. It dropped about 2.1 percentage points to 6.7% in 2008-2009. This was also the decade when India's tryst with globalization well and truly began. For the first time, it opened up many new opportunities for India and its citizens, but along came several challenges as well. But one thing was for certain, the dream of 7% growth over the next 2 decades was not an unrealistic one anymore.
Today, as you know, the general consensus is we are doing well, our reserves are very good, balance of payments are strong. Exchange rate management is good. Instead of depreciation fears, there are fears about acceleration or what you might call, everything in India today seems to be so much better.
In the context of the overall economic framework, a significant change that Team Vajpayee brought about was to establish a credible framework for fiscal discipline. Yashwant Sinha's 2000-2001 budget speech first pointed towards a specific legislation for fiscal responsibility when he said, the country must put its fiscal house in order. In December 2000, Sinha introduced the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Bill in Parliament. The NDA government, which had presented 7 successive budgets, chose to call early elections in February 2004, a gamble that backfired. A surprised Congress party reaped the backlash against the NDA's India Shining campaign. A hasty coalition, the United Progressive Alliance, was born with the backing of communist parties.
That the post of Prime Minister has not been my aim.
And in a further twist, Sonia Gandhi chose not to take the top job, a move that meant the original reformer was back, this time at the very top. The path to fiscal consolidation was well and truly set in UPA's first budget. The FRBM Act and Rules was notified with effect from the 5th of July 2004. However, the road ahead was littered with obstacles to adhere to the mandates of the Act.
However, the implementation of the TFC recommendations will put a large burden on central finances through the period 2005-10 and especially in the first year, 2005-6, when the change to the new pattern will take place. Consolidation and rescheduling of central loans, reduction in the interest rate, and specific grants under different heads will affect both capital and revenue receipts of the central government. The total impact on the central budget for 2005-06 will be approximately rupees 26,000 crore, or an addition of 3/4 of a percentage point as a proportion of GDP. Needless to say, this will have an impact on government's capacity to abide by the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act in 2005-06.
Over the next 5 years, the growth in government revenues facilitated the targeted fiscal consolidation, even though below-the-line expenditure on oil, food and fertilizer subsidies masked the true extent of the real deficit. Fiscal prudence was dealt further blows by the Sixth Pay Commission, the farm sector bailout and a global financial crisis.
Because of the conscious shift in expenditure in favor of health, education and the social sector, we may need one more year to eliminate the revenue deficit. In my view, this is an entirely acceptable deferment.
The global meltdown in 2008 proved that India could not remain insulated from developments in international financial markets. Fiscal prudence took a backseat. Pranab Mukherjee, who came back to the finance ministry after 25 years, quoted Kautilya to soothe anxiety over the break from fiscal conservatism.
I intend to take Kautilya's advice and return to the FRBM target for fiscal deficit at the earliest and as soon as the negative effects of the global crisis on Indian economy have been overcome. On the medium-term fiscal perspective, I await the recommendations of the 13th Finance Commission.
This was a decade where India's engagement with the world economy expanded, and as a result there was an uptick of growth across varied sectors.
India started engaging within the neighborhood. We looked at Sri Lanka, we looked at SAARC, we had our economic cooperation agreement with Singapore, we engaged with the ASEAN. So here India became a player, the world's trade stage. Which is very important, and that is what really I think was the most important ingredient in India's economic growth.
If large-scale PSU sell-offs and spanking new roads were among the key reforms in the first half of the decade, there were several structural reforms as well. The NDA reformed the additional excise duty, introduced service tax and made decisive moves towards a value-added tax, which was eventually implemented from the 1st of April 2005.
I urge all states that have not yet passed the relevant VAT legislation to do so before the end of 2004.
From fiscal 2006, the UPA slashed non-agro peak customs duty rates to 15% from 20%, closer to the East Asian levels. Finance Minister P. Chidambaram also announced new slabs for income tax.
The new tax brackets and the new rates will be as follows: up to rupees 1 lakh, nil across the board.
Subsequently, he began the process of revamping direct taxes through a new code, even as he set April 1st, 2010 as the date for the rollout of a goods and services tax.
I propose that we set April 1, 2010 as the date for introducing GST in India.